I should have known the moment I saw that house that something was wrong. It wasn't a horror movie house. It wasn't some rotting Victorian mansion with crows circling the roof or boards nailed over the windows. No, it was beautiful. A modern, glass-fronted masterpiece tucked away in the deep woods of the Pacific Northwest. Sleek, expensive, spotless. But looking back, now that I know what happened in the dark, I realized the house was just like him. A polished, perfect mask designed to hide the rot underneath. I met Elias at a gallery opening in the city. I was a freelance photographer, drowning in debt, and he looked like the kind of man who owned the life I wanted. He was charming, soft-spoken. He had this way of tilting his head when he listened to you, as if you were the only person in the room. Your work has a certain vulnerability, he had said, swirling a glass of expensive red wine, but lacks scale. I need someone to document a private collection. One weekend of work, $100,000 cash. 100,000. It was a number that made me stop breathing. It was enough to pay off my studio, my mounting credit card bills, every mistake I had ever made. I didn't care that I didn't know him. I didn't care that the location was 3 hours away from the near cell tower. I saw a way out, and I took it. The drive was long. The road turned from asphalt to gravel, and then to dirt, winding deeper into the shadows of the pines. The trees grew so thick they seemed to swallow the sunlight, casting a cold, gray hue over everything. The further I drove, the more the forest felt like it was closing in, like the wooden jaws of some ancient beast. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the engine cut out, and the silence of the forest rushed in. It was heavy, too heavy. There were no birds, no wind in the branches, just the ticking of my cooling engine and the sound of my own heart thudding against my ribs. Elias was standing on the porch. He wasn't wearing his suit this time, just a gray cashmere sweater and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I noticed then, for the first time, how still he was. He didn't fidget. He didn't blink as often as a normal person should. He just stood there, like a statue carved from ice. "You made it," he whispered, his voice barely carrying over the distance. "Welcome to the sanctum. Sarah, it's incredible." "Elias," I said, grabbing my camera bag from the passenger seat. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was the caffeine from the drive. I was wrong. It was instinct. "The light is best in the basement," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "I've prepared a studio, specifically for our session. I think you'll find the atmosphere very inspiring." As I stepped across the threshold, the air changed. Outside, it smelled of pine and damp earth. Inside, it smelled of bleach. Heavy, biting, clinical bleach. The floors were polished concrete, reflecting the dim light like a dark mirror. There were no photos on the walls, no furniture in the hallway, no signs of a life being lived. Just a long, empty corridor leading to a single, steel-reinforced door at the end. "Is there anyone else here?" I asked, my voice sounding thin and fragile in the empty space. "Just us," Elias said. He was standing right behind me, too close. I could feel the heat radiating off him, but he wasn't breathing heavily. He was just watching the back of my neck, his eyes fixed on the pulse in my throat. "The collection, it's downstairs," I asked, trying to break the tension. "Everything is downstairs." "Sarah," he pointed toward that heavy door. It looked out of place against the modern wood accents. It looked like something you'd find in a bunker or a slaughterhouse. "After you," he said. I looked at the handle. It was cold to the touch. I opened it, and the darkness from the stairwell seemed to swallow the light from the hallway, pulling me down into the silence. "The stairs are steep," Elias whispered into my ear, his breath cold against my skin. "Don't slip." The door clicked shut behind me. It wasn't a loud sound, not like a heavy iron gate in a movie, but it felt just as final. A soft, metallic snap that severed me from the rest of the world. The stairs were made of raw steel, They groaned under my weight, a low, vibrating hum that traveled up my legs and settled in my chest. "The light switch is at the bottom," Elias whispered from the shadows above. I couldn't see him anymore. He was just a shape, a darker patch of gray against the blackness of the stairwell. I reached out and touched the wall for balance. It was cold, damp, and covered in those same white, sterile tiles. Step, step, step. I counted them to keep my mind from screaming. By the time I reached 40, my feet hit flat ground. The air here was different. It didn't just smell like bleach anymore. Underneath the chemical sting, there was something else. Something heavy. Something sweet. I fumbled for the switch. My fingers found a cold, industrial lever. I pulled it down. A row of fluorescent tubes flickered to life. They didn't just turn on, they struggled. They buzzed and popped, casting a sickly, rhythmic strobe across the room before finally settling into a harsh, blue-white glare. The room was vast. It was an open concrete box, maybe 50 feet across. In the center, directly under the brightest light, sat a single wooden chair. It was an old chair, oak, the kind you'd see in a farmhouse kitchen, but someone had modified it. Heavy leather straps were bolted to the armrests, and the legs were anchored into the concrete with thick steel brackets. "Elias," I started, my voice echoing so loudly it sounded like someone else was speaking. "What is this? This doesn't look like a studio." He was coming down the stairs now, slowly, one step at a time. He didn't look at me. He looked at the chair. He looked at it with a strange, hungry kind of pride. "Most people think photography is about the subject," he said, his voice calm, almost bored. "They're wrong. Photography is about the light, and the light is brightest when everything else is stripped away." He reached the bottom of the stairs and walked past me. He didn't even glance at my camera bag. He went straight to a long, stainless steel table against the far wall. It was covered in a white, heavy sheet. "I told you I collect moments of honesty," he continued, his back to me. "But honesty is a rare thing. People lie with their eyes. They lie with their smiles. Even their fear is usually just a performance for the camera." He reached out and pulled the sheet back. My breath caught in my throat. It felt like a physical weight was pressing down on my lungs. On the table, laid out in perfect, surgical order, were dozens of tools. Scalpels, forceps, retractors, and things I didn't recognize. Long, thin needles with hooks at the end. All of them were polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the buzzing lights above. "Elias, stop this," I whispered. I took a step back, my boots squeaking on the polished concrete. "I'm leaving. Keep the money. Keep the deposit. Just let me go back to my car." He turned around then. He held a small, delicate blade between his thumb and forefinger. He looked at it with a kind of affection, as if it were a rare diamond. "The car is already gone. Sarah, my driver took it to the quarry an hour ago. By tomorrow, it will be at the bottom of the lake, along with your phone and your ID." He took a slow step toward me. "You aren't a photographer anymore. Sarah," he raised the blade, pointing it toward the wooden chair. "You're the art." I felt my stomach drop into a bottomless pit. Gone. My car, my phone, everything that connected me to the world outside this concrete box had been erased while I was busy admiring the architecture. "You're joking," I said, but my voice was a ghost of itself. "This is some kind of sick joke. You want to see if I'll react, right? You're filming this." I looked around frantically, searching the corners of the ceiling for cameras, for a crew, for anyone who would step out and tell me this was all a prank. But there was nothing, just the white tiles, just the buzzing lights, and Elias. "I am filming this," Elias said, gesturing to the heavy camera rig mounted directly above the oak chair. But there is no audience. Sarah, not yet. I don't share my work until it's finished. He moved with a terrifying grace, circling me like a predator who knew the prey had nowhere left to run. Every step he took was silent. He didn't even seem to breathe. Why? I managed to choke out. I didn't do anything to you. I just wanted to work. That's exactly why, Elias whispered, stopping just a few feet away. Because you were willing to come here for a paycheck. You were willing to ignore every red flag, every instinct, because your bank account was empty. That is the ultimate human truth, isn't it? We sell ourselves, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but the frame. He held up the scalpel again. I'm just the one who bought the final piece. I looked at the stairs. They were only 20 feet away. If I could just get past him, if I could reach that steel door. Don't, Elias said, as if he could read the frantic electrical pulses in my brain. The door at the top is magnetic. It requires a code, and even if you could get through, the nearest neighbor is 10 miles away. You'd die of exposure in the woods before you found a road. He reached out, his hand moving toward my face. I flinched, pulling back until my shoulders hit the cold, tiled wall. Don't touch me. I spat. The fear finally started to turn into a desperate, jagged kind of anger. The anger is good, he murmured, pulling his hand back. It adds color to the skin. It makes the eyes vibrant. He pointed to the chair again. Sit. If you sit, we can begin with a conversation. If I have to put you in that chair, we begin with the silence. I looked at the leather straps on the armrests. I looked at the bolted legs. I had to choose. I had to choose how the nightmare started. I stared at the chair. It looked different now. The leather straps didn't look like worn-out farm equipment. They looked like constraints, though it didn't look rustic. It looked like it was soaked in centuries of silent terror. Sit, Elias said again, his voice a soft command that seemed to vibrate through the very concrete beneath my feet. My legs felt like they were made of water. My mind was screaming, run, but my body was paralyzed, locked in a staring contest with the silver blade in his hand. If I ran, he'd cut me. If I sat, he'd cut me anyway. I looked at him, really looked at him. There was no mercy in his eyes. There was no anger, either. Just a calm, academic curiosity, like a child who had found a new bug to pull the wings off. What? I asked again, but this time it wasn't a question. It was a plea, a final, hopeless attempt to find a single spark of humanity in the void before me. Elias just tilted his head. He didn't answer. He just waited, holding the scalpel like a delicate conducting baton. I walked toward the chair. Every step was a battle against my own instinct for survival. My breath was shallow, rapid, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. I sat down on the cold, hardwood. The moment my skin touched the seat, the straps was around my wrists. He moved so fast, I didn't even see him drop the scalpel. It was just a blur of gray cashmere in the dry, rasping sound of leather against skin. Perfect, he murmured, his face only inches from mine. I could feel the coldness radiating off him, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the basement. He tightened the buckles, one on each wrist, one on each ankle, and a final, heavy strap that came across my chest, pinning me so tightly I could barely draw a full breath. Elias, please. I started to cry. The tears were hot, blurring my vision, but I could still see his smile, a widening abyss in the white light. Hush, Sarah, don't waste your breath on begging. It's unoriginal. It's tedious. You're the artist here, not some common, fearful creature. He walked back to the table, his shoes squeaking against the concrete, a sound that felt like it was scraping the inside of my skull. When he returned, he was holding a new tool, a long, thin needle with a wicked hook at the end. I don't collect bodies. Sarah, he said, positioning the needle just below my left eye. Bodies are disposable. I collect the truth. And the truth is only revealed when the mask is stripped away. What are you going to do to me? I whispered, my entire body shaking so hard the wooden chair groaned against the bolts. He leaned in closer, his gaze locked on mine. I'm going to document the exact moment your hope dies. I'm going to capture the precise, microscopic transformation when the human spirit realizes it is utterly and completely alone. He raised the needle. Let's begin. I closed my eyes, waiting for the pain. But it didn't come. Not yet. The first thing I felt was the sting, a sudden, sharp prick on my forearm. It was minor, like a paper cut, but in that silent, white-tiled room, it felt like a gunshot. A simple incision, Elias murmured, pulling the scalpel away. A baseline. We need a reference point. Sarah, for comparison. He was standing to my side now, holding a small, gray light meter, the kind photographers use to get the perfect exposure. He was measuring the brightness of the blood, the way the fluorescent lights reflected off the red liquid pooling on my skin, the color of fear. He whispered, almost to himself, "It's brighter than usual, more vibrant, the adrenaline. It makes the vessels closer to the surface." I couldn't look away from my arm. The blood was a vivid, impossible red against the white skin. I could feel the thudding of my own heart, pushing the blood out of the cut, a rhythmic, pulsing reminder that I was still alive. "Please, Elias," I managed to choke out, my voice a broken thing. "You said you wanted scale. Sarah, you said you wanted a subject that had never been documented. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. The ultimate subject, the human soul, under extreme stress." He moved behind the chair, his hands brushing against the top of my head. The contact made me shiver, a violent, uncontrollable spasm that made the leather straps cut into my wrists. "Extreme stress is like a fire," he continued, his voice calm and academic, as if he were giving a lecture in a grand hall. "It burns away the pleasantries, the lies, the social graces. It reveals the raw, primal architecture underneath." He leaned in closer, his breath hot on my ear. "You see yourself as a victim, Sarah, but in this room, you are a collaborator. You are the canvas, and I am the brush." He walked back to the stainless steel table, the sound of his shoes against the concrete a rhythmic, ticking clock. When he returned, he was holding a large, heavy-duty clamp. The jaws were jagged, serrated, and looked capable of crushing bone. "This is an industrial clamp," he explained, holding it up to the buzzing light. "Usually used for metal, but its purpose is simple, to apply pressure, to create compression." He knelt down beside me, bringing the clamp close to my left foot. "I'm going to apply pressure to your second toe," he said, his voice almost gentle. "Not enough to break it, just enough to stimulate the nervous system." No, Elias, please don't. I'll do anything. Just let me go. I'll give you whatever you want." I was hysterical now, screaming until my throat was raw, but my voice just bounced off the tiled walls, a hollow, futile noise that only I could hear. "You've already given me everything. Sarah, you just don't know it yet." He placed a clamp on my toe, and then he started to turn the screw. The pain was unlike anything I had ever imagined. It wasn't a sharp sting. It was a deep, dull, crushing agony that seemed to travel up my leg and straight into my heart. It was a pain that didn't have a color. It had a sound, a low, vibrating moan that filled my entire being. "Focus on the sensation. Sarah," Elias whispered, his voice a dark lullaby in the white noise. "Don't fight it. Accept it. Witness it. What does it feel like? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it heavy? I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. There was nothing in my universe but the pain. A vast, white-hot ocean that had swallowed me whole. "Look at the camera rig above you," he commanded, his hand gently guiding my chin upward. "Document it. Write it down in your mind. This is the truth of existence. Sarah, this is the sound of a human being breaking." He tightened the screw another turn. I didn't scream this time. There was no more sound left in me. There was only the darkness and the buzzing lights and the soft, rhythmic sound of Elias breathing. The pain in my foot had shifted. It wasn't a sharp scream anymore. It was a dull, rhythmic throb that timed itself to the flickering of the fluorescent lights above. Everything in this room had a pulse. The buzzing tubes, the drip of a pipe somewhere in the shadows, and the heavy, wet sound of my own gasping breath. Elias stepped back. He wasn't looking at me with malice. That was the worst part. He looked at me with the clinical satisfaction of a scientist watching a chemical reaction reach its peak. "The silence is the most interesting part," he whispered, circling the chair again. "Most people think the screaming is the climax. They're wrong. The screaming is just noise. It's the moment after, when the vocal cords are frayed and the mind realizes that no one is coming. That is the moment of pure, crystalline honesty." He reached up and adjusted one of the lenses on the overhead camera rig. The clicking of the aperture sounded like a bone snapping in the quiet of the basement. "Tell me, Sarah," he said, leaning in so close I could see the tiny, broken capillaries in his eyes. "What are you thinking about right now? Is it your studio, your debts, or is it the man you met at the gallery, the one who promised you a future?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My tongue felt like a piece of dry leather in my mouth. "You're thinking about the stairs," he murmured, answering his own question. "You're counting the steps in your head. You're imagining the weight of the steel door at the top. You're wondering if I left it unlocked, just for a second." He let out a short, dry chuckle. It was a sound devoid of any real mirth. "Hope is a cruel thing, isn't it? It's the last thing to die. I could peel away every inch of your skin, and you would still be looking for a way out. It's fascinating." He walked over to a small, black speaker sitting on the workbench. He pressed a button, and the room was suddenly filled with a low, distorted static. But it wasn't just white noise. Underneath the hiss, there were voices. Faint, sobbing, whispering names that I didn't recognize. "Listen," Elias said, his eyes widening with a frantic, manic energy. "This is my library, the audio component of the collection. Can you hear the transition? The exact second where the plea turns into a prayer, and the prayer turns into nothing." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sound, but it felt like the static was crawling under my skin, infecting my very thoughts. That was Chloe. He pointed to a particularly sharp spike in the static. A dancer. She thought she could bargain. And that was Mark. He thought he could fight. He turned the volume up. The basement seemed to vibrate with the echoes of people who were no longer people, but mere recordings in Elias's twisted archive. "But you, Sarah," he said, turning the sound back down until it was just a ghostly hum. "You're a photographer. You understand the frame. You understand that once the shutter clicks, the moment is trapped forever. You aren't just a recording. You're the masterpiece." He picked up a heavy, black marking pen from the table. He approached me, and I felt the cold, wet tip of the marker touch the skin of my forehead. He began to draw. Slow, deliberate lines. He traced the orbit of my eyes, the bridge of my nose, the curve of my jaw. It felt like he was mapping out a territory, marking the boundaries of where he would begin his work. "Don't move," he hissed, his hand steady as a surgeon's. "I need the proportions to be exact." As he moved to mark my neck, his sweater brushed against my hand, the hand that was strapped to the right armrest. And that's when I felt it. A small, cold, metallic shape in the pocket of his cashmere sweater. The remote, the one he used to lock the door at the top of the stairs. It was right there, inches from my fingertips. If I could just loosen the strap, if I could just move my hand a fraction of an inch. "There," Elias said, stepping back to admire his drawings on my skin. My face was now a map of black ink, a blueprint for my own destruction. "The light is perfect. The subject is ready. He turned back to the table to pick up a fresh scalpel. His back was turned. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I started to pull. The leather strap was thick, treated with oil to make it supple, but incredibly strong. Every time I pulled, the buckle bit deeper into the meat of my wrist, looming a fresh, hot pain that made my vision swim. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Elias was humming now, a low, melodic tune that I recognized from the gallery opening. Something classical, something elegant. He was cleaning a set of long, thin needles, wiping them down with a bleach-soaked cloth. The smell was overwhelming. It felt like it was dissolving the lining of my lungs. I twisted my wrist, feeling the skin tear against the edge of the leather. I could feel the warmth of my own blood acting as a lubricant. It was a gruesome, sickening realization, but the more I bled, the easier my hand moved. Just a little more. I thought. My teeth clenched so hard I feared they would shatter. Just an inch. Elias stopped humming. He stood perfectly still, his back still toward me. My heart stopped. Had he heard the creak of the chair? Had he heard the wet, sliding sound of my skin against the strap? You know, Sarah, he said, his voice echoing in the vast space. The most beautiful thing about a photograph is that it never changes. People grow old. They betray you. They die. A photo is a promise that stays kept. He turned around slowly. I froze. My hand was halfway out of the strap, covered in blood, tucked under my own thigh to hide the movement. Do you believe in promises? Sarah, he was looking at me, but he wasn't looking at my hands. He was looking at the black ink lines on my face, checking if the sweat had blurred his blueprint. I believe in consequences. I managed to whisper. My throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. Elias smiled. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. Exactly. Every action has a reaction. Every shutter speed has a result. You're learning. He walked toward me, the scalpel glinting in his hand. He wasn't heading for my arm this time. He was heading for my face. Now, he whispered, leaning over me. Let's see what lies beneath the ink. He lowered the blade. The tip touched the black line just below my left eye. I felt the cold steel break the skin. A tiny, sharp sting. And then, I felt his sweater brush against my free hand. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about the pain in my wrist or the blade in my eye. I lunged. My hand, slick with my own blood, slid out of the strap like a dying fish. I reached into his pocket, my fingers closing around the cold, hard plastic of the remote. Elias gasped. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was a sound of pure, unfiltered shock. The scalpel slipped, carving a jagged, shallow line across my cheek. But I didn't care. I pulled the remote out and jammed my thumb down on the largest button. From the top of the stairs, far above us, came a heavy mechanical clack. The magnetic lock had disengaged. You, Elias whispered, his eyes turning into two black pits of rage. You ruined the shot. He raised the scalpel high, his face twisting into a mask of monstrous, jagged fury. Run, my mind screamed, but I was still strapped to the chair by my chest, my legs, and my other arm. The scalpel was coming down, a silver streak in the harsh, buzzing light. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to scream. I swung the heavy, plastic remote in my free hand, hitting his wrist with a desperate, hollow thwack. The blade skittered across the concrete floor, ringing like a bell as it disappeared into the shadows near the workbench. Elias didn't scream. He didn't even grunt. He just stood there, looking at his empty hand, then back at me. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any threat he had whispered. It was the silence of a machine recalibrating. You broke the frame, he whispered. His voice was different now. It wasn't academic. It wasn't calm. It was a low, vibrating growl that seemed to come from the very bottom of his lungs. He lunged for my throat. I jammed the remote into his face, hitting the bridge of his nose with everything I had. I felt the cartilage give way, a sickening, wet crunch that echoed off the white tiles. He stumbled back, blood erupting from his nose, staining his gray cashmere sweater with dark, jagged blossoms of red. The strap, I gasped, fumbling with the heavy leather buckle on my chest. My fingers were slick with blood. The leather was stubborn, the metal prong of the buckle biting into my skin. Pull, pull, pull. Elias was coughing now, a wet, choking sound. He wiped the blood from his mouth, his eyes fixed on me with a hatred so pure. It felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. You think you can leave? He wheezed, reaching behind him for the workbench. His hand closed around a heavy steel mallet, the kind used for shaping metal. I gave one final, agonizing yank on the chest strap. The buckle snapped. The leather flew back, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. I was free from the waist up, but my legs and my left arm were still bolted to the chair. Elias was coming back. He didn't glide this time. He stomped, his heavy shoes echoing like cannon fire in the small room. I was going to make you beautiful. He spat, raising the mallet. I was going to give you immortality. Now, I'm just going to give you the ground. He swung. I ducked my head to the side, the heavy steel head of the mallet smashing into the oak backrest of the chair. Splinters of wood flew into the air, cutting my shoulder. The entire chair shuddered, the bolts in the concrete groaning under the impact. I didn't wait for a second swing. I grabbed the heavy industrial clamp he had used on my foot, the one still sitting on the edge of the chair. As he raised the mallet again, I swung the clamp with both hands, aiming for his knees. The heavy metal hit his kneecap with a sound like a breaking branch. Elias screamed, a real, human, agonizing scream that tore through the basement and shattered the last of his perfect silence. He collapsed, the mallet clattering to the floor, his leg buckling at an impossible angle. The code, I whispered, my hand shaking so hard I could barely grip the buckles on my ankles. What is the code for the door? Elias. He was curled on the floor, clutching his knee, his face a mask of sweat and blood. He looked up at me, and for a second, the madness was replaced by something else. Spite. There is no code. He wheezed, a dark, bloody grin spreading across his face. The remote. It doesn't open the door. Sarah. It only unlocks the magnet. You still have a turn. The wheel. He started to laugh, a wet, rattling sound that made my skin crawl. And the wheel only turns from the other side. My heart stopped. I looked at the remote in my hand. One button. One simple black button. I looked at the stairs leading up into the darkness. You're lying, I whispered, my voice cracking. Try it, Elias gasped, his eyes rolling back in his head as the shock of his shattered knee began to take hold. Go ahead. Sarah, climb the stairs. See for yourself. I didn't listen to the rest. I fumbled with the last of the straps, my fingers raw, my wrist bleeding. One ankle, two, and finally my left arm. I was free. I stood up, and my legs nearly gave out. The pain in my crushed toe was a white-hot spike, but I didn't care. I turned and ran for the stairs. Step, step, step. I didn't count them this time. I just climbed, my breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. I reached the top, my hands hitting the cold, steel surface of the door. I pushed. It didn't move. I threw my entire weight against it, my shoulders screaming in protest. Nothing. The magnet had clicked. I had heard it, but the door was dead weight. I looked for a handle, a lever, anything. There was nothing. Just a smooth, flat, steel surface. I turned back, looking down into the basement. From this height, the room looked like a dollhouse. A white, sterile, blood-stained dollhouse. Elias was still on the floor, but he was moving. He was dragging himself, slowly toward the workbench, toward the collection of scalpels and needles. "There's another way. Sarah," he called out, his voice echoing up the stairwell. "The ventilation, the crawl spaces. This house, it wasn't built for living. It was built for observing." He reached the table and pulled a small brass key from under the ledge. "I'll give you a head start," he whispered, his voice suddenly calm again. 10 minutes. If you can find the exit, you win. If I find you first." He picked up a fresh, long-bladed knife. The frame gets smaller. I looked at the darkness of the ceiling, noticing for the first time a small, square hatch near the top of the stairs. A crawl space. I didn't have a choice. I reached up, grabbed the edge of the hatch, and pulled myself into the dark. The crawl space was tighter than it looked from the stairs. It wasn't a room, it was a throat. A long, narrow tunnel of unfinished plywood and cold aluminum ducts that smelled of sawdust and old, stale air. I pulled my legs in just as I heard the heavy clack of the basement door opening below. Elias was moving. Even with his shattered knee, he was moving. The sound of his breathing, a wet, ragged wheeze, echoed up through the floorboards like the heartbeat of the house itself. "I can hear you. Sarah," his voice drifted up, muffled but clear. "I can hear the wood groaning. You're heavy. You're clumsy. You don't know the layout, do you?" I didn't answer. I pressed my face against the cold plywood, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would crack a rib. I began to crawl. My hands hit something cold, something glass. I looked down through a narrow, hidden slit in the wall. I wasn't in a crawl space. I was in a viewing gallery. I was looking down into the kitchen. It was beautiful, minimalist. White marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, a bowl of fresh green apples sitting on the island. It looked like a page from a magazine. But from my perspective, behind the two-way mirror, it looked like a cage. I saw the coffee machine I had used earlier. I saw the chair where I had sat and talked to him about art. And then, I saw Elias. He appeared in the doorway of the kitchen. He was leaning on a heavy, mahogany cane I hadn't seen before. His face was a ruin, blood matted in his eyebrows, his nose swollen and purple. But his eyes, they were fixed on the walls. He wasn't looking for a door. He was looking for me. The mirrors. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice coming through a small, hidden speaker near my ear. "They're everywhere. I spent 3 years designing this house. Every room is a frame. Every angle is perspective." He walked, or rather, dragged his leg toward the kitchen island. He picked up a knife, a long, serrated bread knife. He ran his thumb along the edge, his eyes never leaving the glass in front of me. "Do you know what happens to a subject when it realizes it's being watched?" he asked, leaning his face against the glass. I froze. He was looking directly at me, through the mirror. "The heart rate spikes," he murmured. "The pupils dilate. The sweat begins to pool in the small of the back. It's a beautiful, honest transformation." He slammed the handle of the cane against the glass. The mirror didn't break. It was reinforced, but the sound, the thud, felt like it hit me in the skull. I scrambled backward, my knees scraping against the raw wood. I had to get out. I had to find a way to the exterior walls. The tunnel branched off to the left. It grew even narrower, the ceiling pressing down on my back until I was forced to slither on my stomach like a snake. Then, I heard it, a high-pitched electronic hum. From the vents, a thin, gray mist began to pour. "It's not lethal." "Sarah," Elias's voice crackled through the hidden speakers, sounding amused now. "It's just a sedative, a little something to slow the shutter speed. I can't have you damaging the walls, can I?" The mist smelled like almonds, bitter, sharp, and sweet. My head began to spin, my vision blurred, the edges of the plywood tunnel turning into jagged, black teeth. No, stay awake." I shoved my face into the crook of my elbow, trying to breathe through the fabric of my shirt. I had to find a vent. I had to find a way to the roof. I crawled faster, my fingers catching on splinters, leaving a trail of blood on the insulation. I reached a dead end, a solid brick wall, but there was a light, a tiny, flickering red light coming from a small metal box bolted to the brick. It was the master control for the security system, the brain of the house. My hands were shaking, the sedative making my fingers feel like they belonged to someone else. The red light on the box blinked, a slow, rhythmic off, on, off, on. I looked at the box. It was locked with a simple plastic latch. I grabbed a stray piece of metal ducting, a jagged, sharp shard, and jammed it into the gap. I twisted. The latch snapped, and the panel swung open. Inside was a nightmare of wires. Red, blue, yellow, green. They were labeled in a language I didn't understand, strings of numbers and technical codes. Sarah, Elias's voice was closer now. I could hear his cane hitting the floorboards, just on the other side of the thin plywood wall. Thump, drag, thump, drag. You're getting sleepy, aren't you? It's okay. The yard, it takes time. I looked at the wires. I didn't have time to be a technician. I didn't have time to be smart. I grabbed a handful of the wires, the ones that seemed to lead to the heavy magnetic locks I'd seen on the basement door and the front entrance. I pulled. A shower of sparks erupted from the box, stinging my eyes and smelling of ozone and burnt plastic. Suddenly, every light in the house went out. The humming of the vents stopped. The clack, clack, clack of the hidden cameras adjusting their focus died into silence. The house was dead. What? What did you do? Elias's voice was no longer coming through the speakers. It was raw, coming through the wall. He sounded terrified. For the first time, the roles had shifted. The house was no longer his masterpiece. It was a dark, lightless, hollow shell, and I was the one who knew the shadows better than he did. I found a small, loose panel on the floor of the crawl space. I pushed it, and I fell. I landed on a soft, plush carpet. I was in the master bedroom. It was pitch black, the only light coming from the moon, filtering through the thick, gray clouds of the forest. I looked at the window. It was barred, heavy steel bars hidden behind the silk curtains. There is no way out. Sarah, Elias whispered. He was standing in the doorway, a silhouette against the darkness of the hallway. He held the long, serrated knife in one hand and a heavy, industrial flashlight in the other. He clicked it on. The beam hit me like a physical blow, blinding me, pinning me against the wall. The house is locked down, he said, stepping into the room. The power is out, which means the electronic locks have defaulted to closed. We're trapped in here together, just you and me in the dark. He raised a knife, and I don't need light to finish the job. The flashlight beam was a solid white corridor in the absolute black of the bedroom. Elias stood at the end of it, a silhouette of broken geometry. The cane, the knife, the ruined face. He looked like a nightmare that had finally clawed its way into the light. You ruined the sequence, he said. His voice didn't rattle through speakers anymore. It was right there, raw, wet, filled with a terrifying, quiet rage. The lights, the cameras, it was all perfectly calibrated. Now it's just squalid. He took a step. Thump, drag. I was backed against the window, the cold glass pressing against my spine. The steel bars behind the curtain were a mockery, a cage within a cage. My hand fumbled behind me, along the windowsill. My fingers brushed against something heavy. Cold, a bronze statue, a stylized, abstract bird with sharp, jagged wings. He probably bought it because it looked painful. Don't move, he commanded, raising the knife. If you move, the shadows blur. I need to see the symmetry of your fear. He was 5 feet away. I could smell the ozone from the burnt wires on my own skin, mixed with the iron tang of his blood. He lunged. I didn't duck this time. I threw myself sideways, off the windowsill. The knife sliced through the silk curtain, a sharp, tearing sound that echoed in the silence. I swung the bronze bird with both hands, aiming for the flashlight. The glass of the flashlight shattered. The bulb popped, a tiny blue spark, and then absolute, crushing darkness swallowed the room. "Damn you," Elias screamed, the sophisticated collector gone, replaced by a wounded animal. I dropped to my knees and crawled. The carpet was thick, muffling my movements, but the sedative was still in my system, making my head swim. Thumb dragged. He was moving. He was listening. "I know this room, Sarah." His voice came from the left. "No, the right." The echoes in the empty room were playing tricks on me. I know every floorboard that creaks. I know the exact distance from the bed to the door. I pressed my back against the side of the massive bed. I had to get to the hallway. I had to get to the stairs. Even if the front door was locked, there had to be another way. A kitchen door. A window that wasn't barred. I heard the knife slash through the air, inches from where my head had been seconds ago. He was swinging blindly, hoping to catch a piece of me. I slid along the floor, toward where I thought the door was. My hand hit the wall. Smooth. Cold. I felt along it. A door frame. I scrambled to my feet and ran into the hallway. It was even darker here. A long, straight throat leading to the stairs. Thump drag. Thump drag. He was right behind me, faster than he should have been with a broken knee. I reached the top of the stairs and almost tumbled down. I grabbed the railing, my raw wrists screaming, and forced myself to go down slowly. One step. Two. In the living room, the moonlight was stronger. It filtered through the massive, floor-to-ceiling glass walls, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. The glass walls. I looked at them. They weren't barred. They were just glass. Beautiful, expensive, reinforced glass. "They're tempered, Sarah," Elias said from the top of the stairs. He was a silhouette again, illuminated by the moonlight behind him. He held the knife, reverse grip, like a professional. 3 layers. You could hit them with a sledgehammer, and they'd just web. He started to come down, one agonizing step at a time. "There is no other side for you," he whispered. I looked around the living room. Minimalist furniture. A low, glass coffee table. A heavy, cast-iron fireplace set. The poker. I grabbed the heavy iron poker. It was 4 feet long, capped with a wicked hook. "You're fighting the frame, Sarah," Elias said, reaching the bottom of the stairs. He was 10 feet away. "Accept the immortality I'm offering you. Your name will be known. Not the way you think," I whispered. I didn't swing for him. I ran for the glass wall. I swung the iron poker with every ounce of strength I had left, fueled by the memory of the basement, the smell of bleach, the sound of the static. The sound was deafening. The glass didn't break. He was right. A spiderweb of white fractures blossomed outwards from the impact point, but the wall held. Elias laughed. A wet rattle. "I told you." He raised a knife and lunged, no longer caring about symmetry. I dropped the poker and grabbed the low, heavy glass coffee table. I didn't think about the weight. I didn't think about my torn wrists. I just lifted it and shoved it forward. The edge of the table hit him in his shattered knee. Elias screamed, a sound that tore the very air. He collapsed backward, the knife flying from his hand and skittering across the floor. He fell onto his back, clutching his leg, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated agony. I didn't look for the knife. I grabbed the iron poker again. Immortal. I hissed at him. I turned back to the spiderweb in the glass wall. I found the central point of the fracture, the place where all the lines met. I swung the poker one last time. The sound was like a bomb going off. The tempered glass didn't just break, it exploded. Thousands of tiny, crystal shards showered outward onto the stone patio, ringing like a symphony of fallen stars. The cold air of the forest rushed in, smelling of pine and damp earth and freedom. I didn't look back at Elias. I didn't look back at the art, or the collection, or the nightmare he had built in the woods. I ran. I ran until my lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. I ran through the brambles and the mud, the branches tearing at my skin, the black ink lines on my face dissolving in my sweat. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have a car. I only had the cold moonlight and the desperate, primal urge to put as much distance between me and that house as possible. I don't remember how long I ran. Hours, maybe. The forest was a blur of gray and black geometry, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I finally collapsed on the shoulder of a two-lane asphalt road. My body finally gave out, the adrenaline evaporating, leaving nothing but pain and the crushing weight of the sedative. A long-haul trucker found me. He said I looked like a ghost that had been chewed up and spit out by the woods. He called the police. They went to the house. The entire tactical team. They expected a siege. They expected a maniac in a bunker. What they found was a dead house. The power was out. The electronic locks were sealed. The front door had to be breached with explosives. Inside, they found the blood. In the bedroom. In the hallway. On the stairs. They found the shattered glass in the living room. And they found the basement. The lead detective told me later that in 20 years of service, he had never seen anything like it. The chair, the straps, the camera rig, and the table of tools. But they didn't find Elias. They found his blood on the floor. They found the cane, and the mallet, and the serrated knife. They even found the remote control, still lying near the chair. But the man himself, he was gone. The forensics team spent weeks dissecting that house. They found the hidden passages in the walls. They found the cameras, and the speakers, and the library of static recordings. They identified the voices. Chloe, Mark, 12 others. All of them, photographers, artists, models. People who had been drowning in debt, looking for a break. People who had accepted a gilded invitation and disappeared into the geometry of the dark. The police told me I was the only one who ever came out. The only one who broke the frame. I'm back in the city now. My debts are gone, wiped out by the Victims' Compensation Fund. I have a new studio. It has huge windows that let in the sunlight, and I never, ever close the curtains. I don't do portrait photography anymore. I don't like looking at people through a lens. I don't like capturing vulnerability. I do landscapes, empty spaces, negative space. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the studio and the sun is setting, I look at the white walls, and I swear, I can see the black ink lines he drew on my face, and I can still smell the bleach. But the worst part, the part that keeps me awake at night, isn't the memory of the pain. It isn't the fear of him finding me. It's the thought of that house, sitting empty in the woods. Because I know, better than anyone, that even without power, even without lights, the lens of that overhead camera is still watching. And Elias, wherever he is just waiting for the next subject to sell themselves piece by piece